This week on the Nittany Dispatch, we discuss the start of spring ball, the naming of the field at Beaver Stadium, and everything else since the last time we spoke. This week on the Nittany Dispatch. Hello and welcome to the Nittany Dispatch. I am John Sauber, Penn State beat writer at the Center Daily Times. She's Audrey Snyder doing the same at The Athletic. And Audrey, it has been about a month since we have convened to talk via a video call here.
In this format, I should tell our listeners that, like, if John calls me in the off season, I send him to voicemail. If I see you at pressers, I just go the other way.
This is the exact opposite of the truth, I think, unfortunately for both of us. It turns into a colossal conversation that we were not prepared to have and did not allocate time for. But no, it has been a while since we've had to discuss things on the air, so to speak, right? This is that time of year, a little bit of a dead time, but things are about to kick up. Penn State starting spring ball yesterday. We're recording Wednesday afternoon on March 26th. They start on Tuesday the 25th, and to our surprise, we get a little bit of extra practice viewing window, which I think was really helpful for both of us and the entire beat, frankly. James spoke at the press conference. I think that's probably the best place to start. What was the most important thing? Because it's not like, I want to be clear, this presser is not the big spectacle of, like, it's been months since we've talked to James. We talked to him last month. There's not always a ton of ground to cover, but there are gaps to fill. What was your biggest takeaway from talking to James yesterday for the first time this spring?
The biggest thing for me, and I led the notebook off with it, but I feel like it's a bit of a 1A, 1B. The biggest thing for me is James saying that the base defense is going to be a 4-2-5. We kind of assumed that was probably going to happen, and James said, hey, remember, like, when I was at Vanderbilt, we were primarily based out of a 4-2-5, and that these were part of the conversations during the Jim Knowles hiring process of, hey, what do we want this defense to be? And this is kind of what they landed on. Now, the next 14 practices, including with the blue-white game about a month from today, they're going to figure out kind of where that fifth guy comes from. If it's a corner, if it's a safety, how they get there for that 4-2-5. But James even said, he said, hey, if we had a bunch of killer linebackers, maybe we won't be doing this. But I think where I'm kind of headed with this, John, is kind of an overarching theme I was starting to piece together this offseason, is that James Franklin, now in his 12th spring here, dozen springs in, along with this veteran coaching staff that he pointed out with Andy Kotelnicki, all of his experience, just general in coaching as a coordinator, Jim Knowles, Lustig as well. Like, this is a veteran staff. They're going to do everything they can to change themselves to make sure they're tapping into their players' skill sets and what they do best. So there is that willingness to say, hey, we got to get this thing right for our players, and we're not going to be stubborn and say, hey, we got to do it this way. We're going to be a base 4-3 because we've done that for a good portion of our time here. And so I think that 4-2-5 was kind of where I would start. But the other 1B we'll get into later on, but that's the receiving core.
Yeah, and I think with the 4-2-5, like, frankly, this is the way to play modern defense in football, right? The teams try to spread you out too often to really be in base as often as you'd like, unless that third linebacker is an unbelievable athlete. Frankly, unless all three linebackers are unbelievable athletes, you're probably better off being a 4-2-5. This kind of sets in motion Tony Rojas and Dom DeLuca being the only starting linebackers, which I think makes sense. There is not a lot of depth at linebacker. I think if you were to have a concern about this defense, that's it. I've said it time and time again on this podcast. I've said it in my writing. Like, I don't think linebacker is the most important position. If I'm going to have a weakness on my defense, that's where I want it to be. And so I think they are well equipped to have a big year defensively, despite any issues there. Even if something were to happen where they were to have to dip down the depth chart, they're so strong in the secondary. I think they're going to be strong on the defensive line that I think they can get away with adequate linebacker play, and I would expect them to be better than that. And this allows them to mask all of that. One of the things James said too is, I asked about kind of where that fifth defensive back will come from. He gave I think the answer I expected. It could be the corner room, could be the safety room, probably a mix of both. Like I would bet if they were to stack up on the depth chart 1 through 4, that maybe 2 of them are corners and 2 of them are safeties traditionally, right? And they're just trying to get the best guys out there. I would think Zion Tracy's got to be near the front of that line right now. I thought he played really well as the nickel last year. I'll be curious to see if he has the exact kind of the traits that Jim Knowles is looking for in that fifth defensive back and how he wants to use them. That being said, Jim Knowles is a brilliant defensive coordinator. I'm sure he will maximize whoever he is out there. But yeah, I think that they're really well positioned with this decision. Like you said, they've been base 4-3 for a stretch. Early on it was base 4-2-5. The last few years, I would say under Tom Allen, under Manny Diaz, there was a lot more 4-3. But under Pry, under Shoop, there was a lot of 4-2-5. And I think this is just a reversion to, honestly, the best form of the Penn State defense moving forward.
Yeah, it's all about tapping into your strengths, right? I was reminded when we were at practice Tuesday evening, looked across the field and said, "Oh yeah, King Mack is back." Right?
Yes.
The familiar faces there as you're kind of doing the numbers check in your head and matching up jersey numbers and names and all that kind of thing. He's another guy that I'm curious where he kind of fits in. And I was hoping we didn't get to it maybe next week. We'll get to it with James Franklin, but about King Mack being back and what a interesting, again, college football in 2025 starts here, goes to Alabama, comes back here. Again, one to keep an eye on this spring too.
Yeah, I think for sure. And someone that the number change between him and Elliott Washington is going to confuse me until the end of time with Mack now wearing 16 when he was number 9 when he was originally at Penn State, and Washington now being number 9 when he switched, I think, halfway through the season from 16 or late in the season at some point.
Yeah.
To 9, and that is going to be a problem for me the rest of the offseason. I can guarantee you that. Because I kept looking at Elliott Washington, and I was like, man, King Mack's a little bigger than I remember. And then, I was like, that's not King Mack. And so, yeah, I think that is the biggest thing defensively for this group. A couple guys I think worth noting there too. Yeah. And Nye White, the transfer defensive end that is coming in, how do I put this? I would temper expectations. I think there is some refinement that's needed there. Not that Deion Barnes can't get him there. I actually think if anyone is going to tap into an edge rusher, I think it's Penn State. They've done a really good job of getting guys like this that are kind of raw. Frankly, a little surprised that he's not more advanced, which, for being honest, is more of an indictment of Texas A&M than anything else, considering the athlete that White was out of high school and the kind of the traits he had then. And so I think over time, Penn State will get more out of Nye White than Texas A&M did, and that he will eventually become the player that he can be. But I don't think that's going to be right away. I don't know that he's going to be even a situational pass rusher right away. I think it might take some time to get there. And if Penn State's best bet is to hope that the second half of the season that they have someone that they can play on meaningful passing downs. But for right now, I think he's probably further away than the recruiting ranking would make you think, or than maybe fans would anticipate based on the stature of Nye White as a high school recruit going to Texas A&M. But yeah, I think he was the guy that stood out to me defensively as, I guess, surprising in either direction. Although maybe I shouldn't have been surprised. I kind of knew what he was coming in, but I think it's more surprising to see it in person.
The thing that I noticed as I went from the offense, walked over to the defense in the shady side of the practice field. It was a little chilly, very windy. It's still very much today. It feels like a winter day in State College.
It was sleeting at my house 5 hours ago.
Yeah, it's not our best weather today, but no. Penn State, for all things considered, I mean, they were outside Tuesday, which doesn't always happen here during the spring. But Jim Knowles, you talk about, we hear James Franklin so many times saying he wants to hire people to be the head coach of the offense, the head coach of the defense. I was getting those like head coach CEO vibes watching Jim Knowles. He, dressed out in sweats, carrying around his practice plan, kind of bopping from position group to position group, walking like nothing. Again, we were there probably for about 40 minutes. There was nothing overly demonstrative from him. And I'm sure we're going to see that because that's kind of been the background on Jim Knowles, and he will get after guys. But we didn't see that early. It very much, to me, felt like this is a guy who's kind of taking note of everything, really smooth.
Learning his personnel would be how I would put it. Right?
Yes,
he's learning the group that he has.
The wheels are spinning as he's going from spot to spot, but you're not seeing like that overly demonstrative side of him, or at least we didn't during that portion. But I think, too, I then walked over to the linebackers, and you see Dan Connor there. And if you want to feel old, which I'm sure many of our listeners will when they see and hear this, there's Dan Connor coaching up LeVar Arrington II. LeVar Arrington II, of course, is wearing the 11. looks big. I mean, he's a big kid, tall kid.
Yes.
He was here part of the early the bowl but playoff practices, I guess, at the end of last
Yeah.
year. He was part of that. Again, they got a ways to go with him. You got plenty of time to get there. But he's a physically imposing dude, and you just kind of look at that and you're like, man, here's Dan Connor teaching LeVar Arrington the second, and then over here you got Deion Barnes, and then you got Torrance Brown with him. Then on the other side of the practice field, you have assistant quarterbacks coach Trace McSorley. Plus, you got the Lettermen that are back ahead of Friday's Pro Day. Guys like Bill Carter, KJ Winston, Devon J. Thomas, Kobe King. Felt like a bit of a homecoming there, John, as you kind of navigated the field.
Yeah, it was very interesting seeing Trace there. We still have not gotten to the point where anyone that I covered at Penn State is coaching there, which I feel slightly
Give
younger.
it time, buddy. Give it time. Yeah,
we'll get there. But yeah, it was interesting seeing Trace kind of taking part in that. I will have a story on him making this transition to coaching next week, hopefully sometime. He is he seems excited, and I think he's uniquely equipped to help Drew Aller. Few people in the country have gone through what Trace did as Penn State's quarterback, what Drew is going through right now. So I think he can help him in that regard. But the offense in general, I think the first thing that stood out when we walked in was that the wide receiver group as a whole looked completely different, both obviously from a personnel standpoint. It's a new group. There's been a lot of turnover at the position, but like physically looked different. And like the first guy I noticed, I know some people have talked about Kyron Hudson and Kobe Howard. Matt Otten is gigantic, like is a massive wide receiver. I'm 6'2". Like seems like he's about my height. Like I usually don't see someone that's like my height and think like this guy's massive. He is enormous. And you can see like oozing with potential with the ball in his hands. There was a one-on-one rep where it was like you got the whole Matt Otten picture in that one rep where he doesn't really win on the route. Like his route running is not refined yet. He's not he doesn't have the kind of footwork necessary to be, even I would say a starter yet at that spot. But he wins the rep anyways because he's bigger and he's stronger and he's like unbelievable in contested catch situations. It seems like because he hauled that thing in. And when I say contested catch, I mean like closer, not necessarily like jump balls, things like that. I'm talking about like fighting for the ball with the DB. He physically imposing. I think he's really impressive. I think he has a chance to be I hate using the term gadget player because it always feels like it has a negative connotation, but a piece of the offense that they try and get the ball to and let him go to work, at least as a freshman. Maybe there's more to that. It's the first practice in the spring. Like he has plenty of time to grow.
I mean, who would overhype the first practice of the spring?
Right. But I'm saying like, well, that's why I'm trying to underplay it and say like he looks like someone who can develop into a really, really quality player at Penn State. But I think the wideout that actually stood out to all of us, though, was Devontae Ross.
Yeah. I wanted to go back to Otten for a second because John was so infatuated with him that on the other side of the field, I was looked at something. Again, wide receivers are more than a field's length away. And you're like, wow, did you see how big Otten is? Like,
he's huge.
He occupies.
He's listed at 6'2", 215. Lie.
Yeah.
It's like 225.
It was, Devontae Ross, to me, was the guy. We go in. I'll mention this because I think it's just, again, it's one drill. It means nothing. We walk in and the cameras are there and Andy Kotelnicki with his big personality is there and Kyron Hudson goes to do a rep, trips over the bag and falls down. And we're all standing there and Andy Kotelnicki goes to, wow, all the cameras are here. This must be embarrassing. And Hudson laughs it off, like it was just one of those moments where, all the eyes are on the receivers. And again, it means absolutely nothing.
And that's an important caveat with all of this, right? This is a portion of one of 15 practices. We try and glean what we can based on movement and stuff like that. I think that's the most helpful thing in these kind of things. Like you can see how guys move compared to other guys. You can see size. You can see physicality. The one-on-ones help with some of that. You can see kind of the more practical situations in one-on-ones. But yeah, I think that's the important caveat with all of this. But Ross, like the short area quickness, like he moves different than everybody else on the roster. Yeah, and I think I might have said this when he first transferred after watching some of them at Troy. I don't remember. It's been a while since we've podcasted. But I think he can be a number one receiver here. Maybe I said the opposite. I don't know. It was a while ago. But based on what I've seen, what I saw in practice, what I saw out of his movements, you talk to people about like the transition guys make and everything like that. You talk to people you trust that have seen him play before too. It sounds like to me and looks like there is wide receiver one upside. I'm sure that won't stop Penn State from going to the portal and trying to find that hyper elite, you know what I mean, true blue number one, like go win every one-on-one situation type of receiver if they go in the portal. But if they don't, like, I don't think I'm as doom and gloom as I was a couple months ago about Penn State's receiver situation moving forward. Just because
40 minutes changed a lot for us.
Yeah, well, I mean,
it's part of it, right?
It's the movement, right? Like it really is like you see someone that moves differently than everybody else on the roster. Caden Saunders is pretty quick in and out of cuts, and Ross was better than he was. Like he is a different player. And again, that's not just my eyes telling me, it's conversations and all that kind of stuff. And so I do think that there is a chance that he is, an 800, 900 yard receiver this year, if not more. And I think that is a welcome change for Penn State. That's replacing a lot of production loss from Tyler Warren. And I think that's kind of something that this offense needs. He is, to be clear, not I think people are expecting like a guy who runs a 4.2 or something like that. That's not what he is. He probably closer to, he is fast. The testing numbers are not going to be as impressive as the play speed. Everyone wants to compare him to Tez Johnson, which is funny because Tez Johnson, who we all talked about how fast he is, ran like a 4.5 and was slow. And so I think the play speed with Ross, like I think with Johnson, is better than the timed speed, the 40 speed, just because he kind of doesn't lose it when he puts the helmet and pads on.
Yeah, he looked good. I mean, again, it's short snippets, but it's promising, right? And I think you mentioned Caden Saunders, and he was next as you were talking. I jotted down his name because I wanted to get to him. We had a chance to talk with him earlier this offseason, and he was saying that, last year was tough. Caden was like, it was really hard. He wasn't on the travel roster. He was dealing with an injury from camp that lingered all throughout the season. I mean, we would see him out there on the practice field. It was clear that he did not look comfortable. He didn't look great, that he was clearly slowed, didn't look himself. But you show up Tuesday to practice, and he looks like the guy that they, thought they were getting at early on last season before the injury. So again, you talk about building optimism. You say, okay, Devontae Ross looks pretty good, passing the eye test day one. Hudson's certainly a big body. Otten is occupying all of John's brain space. And then you say, okay, there's Saunders, looking pretty good. You still have Liam Clifford in that group. Tazir Denmark's a guy that there's a ton of upside there. So you're starting to put it together. And as James Franklin said, if you're a wide receiver or you're a tight end at Penn State, you should be excited because Tyler Warren's 104 receptions from last year?
102, I think he said. Yeah. But no, it's
something like 100 plus.
Yeah. Yes, there you go. But no, I think you're right. And I think the question then is, and this is what people will be wondering, I will allow you to insert a potential portal target into this if you would like a portal target. If you think they're landing someone. Who are the three starters against Nevada? Nevada. Listen, I'm not going to lie. I haven't looked at the non-con a whole lot. That's 3-0 for everyone, in case you're wondering.
There's a chance I could go 0 for 3 on this pick. Again, because who's to say, right? We're sitting here March 26th.
Yeah, listen, this is what the offseason's for.
I would go, and I feel like this is different because we had this conversation sometime around the Orange Bowl, and I believe I said that receiver wasn't here yet. One of the three, you're like the main guy. Could be wrong on that. We'll see. The spring portal opens up while Penn State will be practicing here in the next month. That's going to be a real great time. But in no particular order, I'm going Hudson, Ross, Saunders.
And who's in the slot?
Saunders.
Yeah. See, we agree. That is the three that I would have.
We agree.
And I think the caveat there is
that means we're definitely wrong.
That guy, right. If they get that guy, though, if they get that outside receiver, I think Saunders is the one that goes to the bench because I think Ross bumps inside of the slot and they keep Hudson on the outside. And Saunders, I think, is going to play a lot. I don't know what it means for the rest of the receivers, frankly, the returning guys. Liam Clifford, I would think, would get reps. He got a bunch last year, but it's tough when you bring in two new guys that I don't know, maybe I'm out over my skis on this, but I think they're both potentially better. Like I think Hudson is better than who he's theoretically replacing in Julian Fleming, and I think Ross is better than Trey Wallace from what I've seen thus far. Might be proven wrong. Trey Wallace might go down to Ole Miss and have the best year of his career. I actually do think he'll have a great year at Ole Miss. But I think for Penn State and what they need, I think Devontae Ross is more well equipped to be a true number one in an offense, and Wallace is better as a number two that is not drawing as much as attention, I guess. I think he is. I think Ross is going to be a difference maker. I think Hudson is going to give them reliability, and I think Saunders is going to give them reliability and a little bit of game breaking in the open field. We know that he can make guys miss in the open field. We haven't seen it a lot lately. It was honestly, this was one of those things when you saw Caden Saunders out there. I remember that first practice he came back. I was talking to Daniel Gallen of Minus 24/7 about this. You remember the first practice back where he was like clearly like couldn't run, like he was like hobbling, and you just like feel bad, right? Because he's trying to push, trying to get back. It was like actually nice to see him moving well, right? Because someone that's clearly went through it last year told us he went through it last year. Seeing him back, and he was a 5-star recruit according to some services. I was very high on him when he got to Penn State. Like he's been at Penn State for a while now, right? Like it was nice to see him moving well and kind of able to whatever he can give to Penn State. Yeah, obviously we never want to see anyone get hurt. That's doesn't really need said, but sometimes I feel like I do need to say it. But it was nice to see him moving well and having the opportunity that I think he's been fighting for a few years for now.
Yeah, and one of the things he told us in the offseason was that, not being, especially at USC last year, that was really hard for him, being like, hey, I'm missing out on this celebratory locker room, and I really want to be there. And like, this is a guy who cares a lot, who wants to help the team, and just wasn't able to do that last year because he couldn't stay healthy. The punt return situation could get a little interesting too, with Ross, with Saunders, right? I'm sure you're going to see some other guys back there.
If Ross is as good as I think he is, I don't think they can let him return punts, right? Like I think you just kind of have to. I think at that point it's probably Saunders. Trying to think who else would even be in that. John, Zion Tracy, obviously.
Yeah, at that point, are you telling me that you don't want one of your best 11 on special teams? And wouldn't that be going against the whole philosophy of getting your best 11 on the field? Isn't that why you see Nick Singleton still returning kicks? Isn't that why we saw Saquon Barkley returning kicks?
I think there's some truth to that. Also, my special teams would barely be out there. We know that. Like I would.
That's true. You're never punting. That's right. Yeah.
But no, I think there's truth to that with Ross. But I also like Zion Tracy's really good at it. Like we know that. I guess all things being equal, I want the guy who's playing less or less consequential to my success out there, right? Like if I think Zion Tracy and Devontae Ross are equals as returners or close, I'm just putting like not that Tracy doesn't matter because Tracy I think is going to be a really important part of the defense. But we've seen him do it. We know he can do it. Yeah, and like. It's also the kind of thing where you can put Ross back there in bigger situations if you need to, right? It doesn't have to be static that it's like, well, it's Tracy's job now. It's got to be his forever. Like I think you let Tracy take maybe most of the reps, and when you like desperately need a big play, then you can put Ross back there. But I also think like Zion Tracy's a really good punt returner, and so like that's going to be a factor in this as well.
Curious if Quentin Martin is part of that conversation. I think
he should be.
Yeah, when we talked this winter at the second-year player media day, I do remember talking to him, dusting off the cobwebs as I speak. Yeah. I do remember talking to him about that. And I think, again, this is another guy where you say, okay, how does he slot in on this team? And he was very open and said, like, hey, he thought for sure that either Singleton or Kaytron Allen, one of those guys would be gone. Also thought, like everybody else, that Ja'Juan Seider would still be here, but you have Stan Drayton in place, and then you say, okay, well, what about Corey Smith? What about Quentin Martin?
Cam Wallace, who's coming back from injuries to both legs, which is, I mean, I feel for Cam Wallace. Like, I wouldn't anticipate seeing him at full strength for a bit. Like, and that's tough. Like, when you have two quality backs behind him, you wonder what that means. I still think Cam Wallace is a good running back, so I'm not like discounting his ability to win that third job still. But he like obviously the sooner the sooner he gets back, the better. Like I know I'm speaking the obvious there, but I do think that's true in a competition like this where we saw it with Jackson Smolik and Ethan Grunkemeyer, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like right now, Ethan Grunkemeyer, I would say, is the backup quarterback, and some of that is because Smolik was hurt, wasn't able to get those reps, and so those reps are really, really important. The one player I want to mention for that punt return job, though, potentially, I'll keep bringing him up for everything. May as well throw him at quarterback at some point too. Is Matt Otten, right? Like he gets compared. Like when you talk to people like that, Deebo Samuel type player, right? That big physical receiver that maybe isn't refined, but is like you just get him the ball. I know that he seems big to be a returner, but if he's good with the ball in his hands, get him back there, and maybe that's a good way to get him reps as a freshman, because I do think he's going to be impactful. But yeah, I think like they have a lot of options. They have and I think it says a lot about the guys, about what the offense can be, that they have so many guys that we would trust in the open field. And that is like an important part of like creating offense, is like having guys that can create space. And I think they have several guys that can do that on offense. Whereas, in previous or last year, like, I don't know that we were having this conversation about too many guys on the offense.
Yeah, and during one of those practice snippets Tuesday, I looked across the field and it was Drew Aller, and then behind him was Kaytron Allen and Nick Singleton, and Andy Kotelnicki obviously standing right there too. And in my head, I was like, you know what? I wonder, like, what was the percentage last November, maybe, that you'd get these four faces on the Penn State field together again? And
depends. When was the Ohio State game?
October? Was it October?
I think it was November. It depends on when in November you asked me that question. I'll put it that way. I think it's like November 2nd, something like that. So if you had asked me November 1st specifically,
November 2nd. Yeah, November 2nd is what pops up first. So yeah, game was 2nd.
If you'd asked me November 1st, I'd have been floored. If you'd asked me November 5th, maybe not as surprised.
Maybe get some of those guys. But you had the Andy Kotelnicki, West Virginia. That
Yeah, I mean, listen, nobody was on the Andy Kotelnicki hype train quite like this guy was, but I think it started to become.
You were also on the Dante Cephas hype train like no other, too, to be fair.
I don't know what you're talking about. There's no video evidence of that. Nobody pull that, please. But yeah, no, like I think as it got later in the year, that got less surprising. But yeah, mid-season, this seems like an impossibility. And I think it says a lot about where this program is and the upside of this year. And frankly, like, I think they're handling it really well so far. Like James Franklin seems as loose as he's ever been, as relaxed, as confident. He is like confident in a way that feels like he doesn't feel the pressure that might be there, which is good, right? Like you don't want people operating like they can feel that pressure to an extreme degree. Yeah, I think they're like their brief practice viewing window, the press conference, all of that, like the big overarching takeaway is like, this seems like a team that is ready to make a run at the national title. And the expectations last year were make the playoff, and they met those, and I think exceeded them. You and I had them losing in the first round. It'd be hypocritical to say that we expected them to make it to the semis. You can say what you will about the opponents, but they still won those games they had to win and almost won the semifinal. But yeah, I think they're poised to do that. I think they're in really good position to do that.
They have the roster to do it. Again, we'll see the receiving core, how things shake out there, but there's still a lot of pieces on this roster. And I think that's maybe the thing that fans, and I'm sure they remember it, but that's kind of the thing. And again, it's spring ball, so you're not going to see everybody, right? There's rep modifications all over the place. You're not just going to find, I had somebody say, well, who's the next Tyler Warren? Well, there's not a second one, right? Like that's,
although Luke Reynolds looked pretty good yesterday as well.
Luke Reynolds looked really good. I think he's going to be super talented. Yes. At some point, they'll get Andrew Rapplier back as well.
It's unfair to expect that of anyone on the roster.
Right, but it's like you had a unicorn, and there aren't just, more unicorns in the stable, right? It doesn't work that way. But again, Nick Singleton, Kaytron Allen, Drew Aller, what's at stake for him this year? And going to be, again, one of the most polarizing players in college football, and all the scout hype. I mean, I'm sure we're going to start to see and hear even more of that Friday. Penn State has pro day. We've seen Drew in the past throw to guys, right? We saw it last year. We saw Sean Clifford throw a few years ago before he was declaring for the draft. And
we have no reason to think Drew won't throw again to Tyler on Friday.
Yeah, I would be kind of surprised if he didn't, honestly. Like, if
Yeah.
you're Tyler Warren, this is the guy you just, had a record-breaking year with.
If I were Penn State, I would have Nick Singleton run the 40. Just
to get it out there.
Yes. Well, honestly, you have conversation with guys when they make the decision to come back. Like, if I were them, one of the, I don't want to say carrots that I would dangle, but like one of the things that I would use, be like, hey, we'll let you participate in the 40 or in the pro day to the fullest. Like, get that experience, put that out there to kind of help you a year in advance. That would be one of the things that I would emphasize, at least, if they want to.
You would have a list of demands, I'm sure.
Oh, of course.
You would have that list, man.
And if you weren't meeting all of them, I'm not doing it.
For PS5, you'd want you'd want a lot, like a premier parking spot at the facility.
I don't want the extra controllers. I want my own gaming room, and I want a golf simulator to myself. Right. They have one golf simulator. I want one by myself.
That's right. You want your own simulator.
Because, any chance of getting out there right now, nothing. 20-degree weather, it seems like. By the way, yesterday we go to this press conference. I look at the weather, and it says 54 degrees. Like, cool. Put a hoodie on, put some joggers on, we'll go. And I walk outside, and the wind hits me. It's like, that's not 54. I checked the real field. It says 38. Why even bother telling me the 54? What is the point of the 54? Just show me the 38 and tell me it's 38 degrees outside.
And we've had a few like beautiful days, like great teases that.
Oh, trust me, I know. I golfed on those days.
There have been a few of those that you're like, all right, it's gonna get.
It's the only opportunity.
But it always feels like once Penn State starts spring ball, you get this stretch, and it looks like we're kind of in it now for like the next week, where it hits like winter again, and they're back in Haluba probably. And
it's going to be in the 70s on Saturday, which is crazy.
Ooh. But John, what's the real feel? Since I know you're a big real
probably
guy.
12 if I had to guess. It's going to be in the 40s again next week, though. But no, I do think they're going to be able to practice outside, which is important too. Like they're playing football outside this year because at Beaver Stadium there is no roof, although it does look very different. Including, look at this for a transition. It has a new name.
West Shore Home Field at Beaver Stadium. It took a while, but I got it.
Yes, and I will be calling it Beaver Stadium.
Beaver Stadium.
Which I think is the main thing here, right? Like there's been a lot of consternation about this and people wanting it named after Joe Paterno and all of that stuff that comes with it. At the end of the day, everyone is going to call this Beaver Stadium. Period. Like that's it. No one's going to call it West Shore Home Field at Beaver Stadium. I think I would be stunned if they didn't know that going in. Like they'll get the advantage of having the name of the company, but presumably West Shore Home Field will. I think it's called an educated guess. One that I think you can make as well will be on the field somewhere around like the 20, 25, whatever. Like they'll have that type of
kind of
branding.
Like the playoff logos.
Yes,
it's gonna be like that. Yep.
And like I wouldn't expect it to be their logo, just the name of the company, which is like fine, and they'll get that exposure. But yeah, everyone's gonna call Beaver Stadium. This does not have to be a thing. Like the fact that it becomes a thing, it's just so exhausting. I know you were on the Board of Trustees call. I was on the Board of Trustees call watching it. And it's just, I don't know. It is wildly unnecessary. Like we're not going to have the Paterno conversation. I apologize to everyone that wants that to happen right now, but it's not going to be the case. There are other things they can do to honor people's legacies and stuff like that. It doesn't have to be solely football centric or anything like that. They got a concrete solidified $50 million offer over 15 years, about $3.25 million a year, something like that, $3.33 million a year for the naming rights. And that deal is going to be front loaded essentially to help with the stadium construction. So they don't have to take out as much debt on the project, which by the way, there's a $700 million project they're working on that this essentially allows them. Yes. It essentially allows them to meet that fundraising goal that the Board of Trustees itself had set out for the athletic department to meet. They're like $3 million short, which at this point, like when you've raised 130, I think you're probably going to get that last 3.5.
You're finding that in the couch cushions at this point.
Yeah, right. But yeah, like they're better positioned for the construction project. They're better positioned to the trickle down effect of that is you don't have to kind of funnel donors to the renovation project. now you can kind of funnel them toward scholarships, which they're going to need more of, toward revenue sharing, like toward those other things, like toward NIL, toward helping the teams specifically rather than just the Beaver Stadium project. So I think like all that is to say, fine, who cares? Like you're going to call it Beaver Stadium. I'm going to call it Beaver Stadium. We're all going to call it Beaver Stadium.
Because
The
I
fuss
keep messing
about
up
this.
the name anyway. I can't.
She does. That is accurate. For any listeners curious, I've seen and heard Audrey say this 45 different ways. One of them was correct. But yeah, like it's just everyone's going to call it Beaver Stadium. Right.
Yeah.
We're all going to call it that. It's not going to fundamentally change everything.
And
frankly, it was an issue by the way, for 3 days when the news breaks on a Saturday and the board meeting happens on a Monday. And then it just vanished because that's how this stuff happens. It reminds me of when they started selling alcohol in the stadium. There was an issue with it like for a couple of days. And then all of a sudden everyone forgot. Like I remember when I broke that story, the initial pushback was like, how dare Penn State do this, whatever. There's a vocal part of the audience that doesn't want that, what have you. And then it goes away in 3 days because that's how this always
those people are probably lining up getting drinks.
Right. Like, but like, it just like, I don't know. It was easy to have a take in the moment, and then you realize you probably don't care as much as you thought you did.
Like, this was the only offer that was on the table.
The only concrete offer that made it this far.
So, if you're saying, hey, and it came up on the trustees call, hey, well, we can raise 150 million. We'll do this.
260 million, I think. Then do it.
Whatever it was. Yeah, it's like.
I promise anyone who can raise $260 million, Penn State will take the $260 million. That is not an issue.
It's a thing. And I think the other part of this is other colleges have done this, right? Wisconsin did it with Barry Alvarez, except their deal is in perpetuity.
And it's for $13 million.
Yes. So like you look at it, and one of the other things I heard and saw from readers was, well, 50 million, that seems low for this. It's going to be more in the coming years. Like Penn State showed the numbers and where it stacked up, and the numbers that Ohio State had for a 2-year agreement that they had before. And like,
which was less year over year.
Yes. Like this was a really good competitive deal for Penn State. So,
and the other part of that is, sorry, not to interrupt you, but like people will point to Washington where that is involving several other naming rights. Like it's not just the stadium or what have you. There's basketball arena facilities, all that stuff. So you're not just selling one thing. And people will say like, well, in 2 years, it's going to be, dwarfed by whatever the next big one. Yeah, of course. Like you can't wait 2 years, then you lose out on that funding for 2 years. It's like, it reminds me of the NFL quarterback contract discussion. It's like, well, yes. Patrick Mahomes is suddenly the 12th highest paid quarterback. It's like, well, yeah, he signed his first. The next one he signs is going to be bigger. Like when Penn State in 15 years or earlier, if something happens and they're no longer in this deal, like they will set the record again. Like it's fine. Like it's how this stuff works. The cost goes up and the marketing dollars go up. It is what it is. Like I think it's a little bit intellectually dishonest to bring that up and say like, well, in 2 years it's going to be higher, so you should aim for that. It's like, well, that's not how that works. And so, yeah, we don't have to talk about that anymore.
If the next time fans are back in Beaver Stadium, it would be for the blue-white game in a month.
Yes.
If you want to catch the blue-white game, this is
you better be there.
Way to do it. Be there or you're not seeing it, because James Franklin said the game will not be televised, which is a theme that we're seeing throughout the country, because coaches are saying, hey, why should I publicize and advertise my roster and put it on TV so everybody else can see who we have? Again, spring ball is about the younger guys. Why would you want to showcase your freshmen and sophomores to then get poached by somebody else?
Right. And I think he brings up a good point. And I've had issue with plenty of decisions James Franklin has made in the past. I'm sure I will in the future, but I think this is a smart
one. Every time he punts, John winces.
Yes, that's actually true of all football coaches. But no, I think like this is the right decision. I think it's a good middle ground too of not canceling the spring game. As like people were complaining about it not being broadcast. Like, well, at least it's existing because plenty of other programs are getting rid of that. And so I will be curious to see what it means moving forward and how it changes moving forward, because I think it still could in 2026 and beyond. But yeah, for now, this is, I think, a perfectly fine solution to what is a problem.
Right. And I think, maybe because James Franklin's point, and he was being consistent about this because he mentioned it earlier in the winter, is that there is too much that happens at the university around Blue White Weekend, right? There's too many
Yeah.
fundraising opportunities.
Not just the university, the town, like State College as a whole.
Yeah, it's a huge weekend. It's like a homecoming of sorts. And you also have, I know the collective, they're doing like breakfast with the coordinators the next morning. And like you get people to town. And
I assume you'll be making that donation, Audrey, to attend.
Well, if I find 50 million in my couch cushions, we can rename the stadium for me, and then whatever I have left, if anything, I can round up a few dollars maybe, and just show up there and have breakfast with Andy, and yeah, that would be.
I think that would be very funny. To be clear, but yeah, no, it's too important of a weekend to let it go.
I mean, you have to have those. You have to have those events, and maybe it ends up down the road looking like the Pro Bowl skills competition, right? Where it's like, hey, we're getting people together just to.
Although I have to think Penn State doesn't want to waste a practice on something like that, which is why I think they came down on this side of it.
Yes, that's the other thing to this. I'm glad you hit on that because at the end of the day, you get 15 practices. It's beneficial. You want to learn more about your roster. James Franklin said maybe they'll speed up, shorten halftime. Maybe they won't even have a halftime because he said we've had plenty of years.
Good.
Yeah, we're loving that, right? There's no TV window for the media. There's maybe no halftime, which means we're in and out of there quicker. But you want to be able to see what you have, but also give your fans something that they feel like they're seeing and learning something about your team that, especially going into next year where maybe you are the preseason #1 team, there's going to be a lot of hype, a lot of expectations. It's always a big recruiting weekend as well. So you're going to have some of those pieces, but James Franklin said it likely won't all be live. They'll have some thud in there. So again, it's going to look and feel different than what people are used to. But again, going to have to be in the stadium to check it out.
That's right. And speaking of #1 ranked Penn State teams, you want to talk some Penn State wrestling?
I thought you were going to pivot to basketball there. And I was like, what are you saying?
That was not that pivot at all.
So yeah, Penn State wrestling. I want to talk about this a little bit. If you only came for the football conversations today, this is probably a good spot to leave us. But
or just stick around.
Yeah, because I will tie some of this back to football.
Maybe.
We'll see if I can land the plane. I was in Philadelphia over the weekend for NCAA wrestling. Had a chance to check it out. It's an awesome event. I went several years ago.
Sold out very early too.
Yes, when they were in Madison Square Garden, I had a chance to go and cover it. I'm like, this year, it's in Philadelphia. I want to go. I want to write about it. Yeah, sure, Penn State's going to win. But, can Carter Starachi become a 5-timer? How many national champs? Will they set the all-time scoring record? This machine, this dynasty, this program, it's so impressive. And it's done at just such a high, mind-bending level. It's really awesome to be able to watch it. And the thing that's compelling for me, I am not the technical wrestling expert. I can figure out what's going on out there. I'm getting better at it over time, but it's kind of one of those things where I'm fascinated by successful people and what makes them tick, right? I think that's kind of a lot of the general audience too. And that's why Cael Sanderson's so fascinating. That's why Carter Starachi's so fascinating. And throughout the course of the weekend, you see different snippets and, you're in there in the arena when Starachi's going for 5. At a funny note, I'm down in the corner of Wells Fargo while the match is going on with Keckeisen and Starachi. And I the Penn State fan sections to my right, and they've, all weekend been going crazy. And I look and I see this guy losing his mind, cheering like crazy. And I'm like, oh, let me get a video of the crowd. That man was athletic director Pat Kraft, who was sitting among the Penn State fans. And so it was a really cool scene, historic. Penn State did set the all-time scoring record.
Well, I think that's the interesting part here is the disappointment of Penn State fans that they only had 3 finalists, 2 champions, while also setting the scoring record and then adding one of the best wrestlers in the world for next year on Monday in Masanosuke Ono. It is
and they
funny.
Flipped a Virginia Tech commit I saw too.
Yes, yesterday, who went undefeated this year, was a bonus point machine in New Jersey. Yeah. Was a 3-time state medalist, I believe. Won states this year, New Jersey. But yeah, like this was it was very funny to see some of the reactions of fans like upset. I think probably rightfully so. It was a disappointing Friday for Penn State fans. Saturday, like so many guys wrestled back to get to third place, and Greg Kirkfleet was the only one essentially who like didn't perform to their seed, or sorry, didn't perform to their seed, but like didn't come back in some way. It's because he was dealing with a knee injury. It was very clear on Thursday that he was dealing with it. The fact that he got to the semis with what he has ailing him is pretty impressive. He won't get the credit that Carter Starace did last year because he didn't win the title, but I think Kirkfleet deserves a lot of credit for wrestling the way he did in those circumstances. But yeah, this was like it was the most dominant performance in wrestling history. And this is what this program does.
Yeah, I mean it's every March, right? And Cael Sanderson, I think, hit it pretty square on when he was talking about Starace and kind of the program as a whole. And he's like, our guys all year heard about the chase for the 5th title, the scoring record, all these things. And to be able to come out and exceed expectations or meet expectations, he's like, that's the hardest thing when you're an athlete, when you're a competitor,
right.
To be able to do that. And again, the expectations are so high, they're so lofty. And, Bo Bartlett gets his 100th career win there at the end, and you have 5 guys finish in 3rd place. And it's just a massive accomplishment. And the fact that they're able to do it year after year, national title number 13, the 12th under Cael Sanderson. I had a couple enterprise stories up on The Athletic. If you want to go check them out, or a feature on Carter Starace. Also did a story on David Taylor in year 1 for him, and why I think, the Cowboys are the program best positioned to push Penn State long term. I had a chance to talk with Oklahoma State's athletic director at length. Also had a piece, and this ties back to football, had a piece about revenue sharing. And what happens, because April 7th is kind of the big date here in the calendar for the courts, and what happens with the House case, and how many of these big time programs are going to give their athletes money, a portion of revenue that extend beyond basketball, beyond football, right? What does that look like? That's the big question throughout the country. Athletic directors and coaches throughout the country are having these conversations. Penn State plans to have wrestling be part of revenue sharing. Oklahoma State does as well. Little Rock, learned a lot about Little Rock wrestling this month. They also plan to distribute some of their money to revenue sharing. And it ties back to football, because you say, okay, if you're going to have a cap of $22 million per year in revenue, right? What percentage does football get? And James Franklin was asked about this on Tuesday and wouldn't pinpoint the number, as nobody's really pinpointing right now.
Yeah, but I feel comfortable saying that number was not correct.
The 16 mil, I think.
Whatever it was. I think 16. Like 14 or 16. Like,
16 was, yeah. She was asked about 16. Penn State expects to have the full allotment of revenue, which is that roughly $22 million. Wrestling's going to be part of it. I would anticipate women's volleyball being part of it.
Basketball's I think this is what's interesting. First off, do you know why it's called the House case? Because I felt so much.
Your mind melted during this because you didn't know it was like a name. Yeah.
Because I assumed that it was because it's the House like Congress related. No, that's not. The plaintiff's last name is House, which is a tough scene for me. And because you read so much about it, you just see it called the House case, right? Like you don't see it as House v. NCAA. Like it's very interesting and makes me look like an idiot, which is fine. But no, I think that the interesting part of this is what sports get revenue. I feel confident that football, men's basketball, and wrestling will, and that women's basketball will. And then I'm sure that women's volleyball will. I wonder what that will look like, I guess, is my thing. What's that
percentage?
Like, yeah, like I think the focus will be on the other 4 sports. And I like, you see all the conversations about like, you mentioned Little Rock. They kind of have an advantage in that they can, whatever they get, they can allocate it towards basketball and wrestling if they want to. Like there's this discussion going on in men's basketball right now about revenue sharing, where schools that aren't in Power 4 conferences might have a big advantage with revenue sharing, because VCU can put all of its allotment toward football. They don't have a football or toward basketball, excuse me. They don't have a football program. The Big East schools, right? Like Villanova, Seton Hall, Providence, all of those schools, St. John's, like they can put all of that money towards basketball if they want to. And so they might have an advantage over Power 5 or Power 4, schools that are funding football first. And I think that's going to be interesting at Penn State, where the men's basketball program is a disaster right now. They had a wildly disappointing season where everything fell apart in January, missed the mark on every projection. I thought they would be significantly better than this. I said in December, I think, that I thought they'd make the NCAA tournament. I think most people were there. I think a lot of projections had them there. And as it turns out, it was an unmitigated disaster. They didn't make the Big Ten tournament. And now Mike Rhoades is going into year 3 after a second year in which, listen, he built the roster to make the NCAA tournament in year 2. They had a bunch of contributors that were leaving the program. And he has said time and time again that he wants to build with high school recruiting and then supplement through the portal, which is great and all. But this week, with the portal open, 3 of their 4 2024 signees who spent this year with the program entered the portal. And they have 1 freshman from last year's roster that was a scholarship player, this Dominic Stewart, left on the team, or at least not in the portal. Those guys can theoretically come back. I would not expect any of the 3 back. Like, it is a legitimate disaster right now, and it makes you wonder just how long Mike Rhoades' tenure is going to be at this point.
I mean, I showed up to one game this year, John. It was the Rec Hall game. It was a train wreck.
Right. It was like, this is where this has gone. And I think men's basketball fans have a right to be disappointed. Penn State is putting, like, I've seen a lot of we were talking about this pre-podcast. I've seen a lot of it's Penn State basketball. They don't care. No one cares, whatever. Like, they're investing real money into this, and they're going to get real revenue sharing money. And I think the expectation is that results will come with it. And there have been visits put out there that they're getting guys in the portal to at least visit, but they need to hit it in a massive way this offseason. They have, a couple guys potentially coming back. One, Yannick Coden Niederhauser, who is like a potential all Big Ten level player, who I think is very
first team all name, no doubt.
Yes. He's excellent. Great interview too. But like, he's probably going to be the focal point on both sides of the ball. That being said, like, revenue sharing is a thing for retaining guys too. And I'm sure that will cost a pretty penny. I know it will. If he were to come back, and that's not even an ironclad decision yet. So this is a program that went looking like it was going to make the NCAA tournament in December for the second time in 3 years to a shell of itself. And now I think it's fair to question pretty much everything about it moving forward.
And the other piece of revenue sharing is the roster caps and
yes.
Capped rosters replacing scholarship limits, right? So if you've casually followed along and are kind of like, we'll deal with this in April, like that's where this heads, right? So for example, wrestling, they have 9.9 scholarships now. That's always how it's been under the NCAA model. Cael Sanderson, among many others, is always like, well, this makes no sense. We have 10 weight classes. You can't even have 1 scholarship wrestler per weight class. Obviously, the scholarships are divvied up into partials because your Olympic sports, you can have partial scholarships, but you can't for football. So you're replacing that with the 9.9 with up to 30 wrestlers. Well, Penn State carries typically between 37 and 38 wrestlers on the squad. So Cael Sanderson told me, when I was working on this story, he's like, one of the sad things for us is that there's 7-8 guys that typically are the ones that years after the fact, they're coming back, donating to your program, donating their money, but also their time. These are the guys who care a lot. They're, training partners, helping people in the room. So what happens to those guys? And James Franklin was asked, because for football, the number will be 105, right? So what happens, to those other guys? Do you have as many walk-ons? Or, he mentioned on Tuesday that, hey, there's going to have to be guys that are going to need to be getting comfortable playing special teams because you're not going to have as big of a roster as you normally would. Now, the 105, again, this is all assuming house settlement, all that gets taken care of, which April 7th is the date, but maybe something happens a week or two later, right? Like, it could.
I think the day it would be enacted is like the 1st of either July or June. I think it's July.
Yes. And then for football, it would be like when you have preseason camp in August.
Yeah,
that's when like
timeline for football.
Yeah. Yes. Yep. So again, it's the sport the sport is changing. All of collegiate athletics are changing. This is poised to be a monumental shift. People are anticipating it's going to happen. I reached out to probably about 15 athletic directors throughout the country for this wrestling story. And again, it's indicative of where everything is with football too, because many of them said, hey, we're not going to say anything until this happens. Like, we're anticipating it's going to happen, but also the competitive piece, right? You're not going to say, hey, well, we're going to earmark, 18 million or 20 million for football here, and school X is going to, hey, well, all 22 is going there, right? So it's going to be a mess. It's going to be interesting, but it's going to be messy. And it's just kind of a new era, but that's where things stand in the off season, John. That's where we're at here in late March.
Yeah, and we will be back at some point this spring as well. This will not be the last spring ball podcast, but I thought it was important to talk after seeing some real practice and having some developments there. If you would like to read Audrey and I's observations and notes from that practice, you can find mine at centerdaily.com. You can find hers over at The Athletic. You can find me on Twitter at John Sauber and on Blue Sky. If you search John Sauber, you can find Audrey on Blue Sky by searching Audrey Snyder. You can find her on Twitter at OddSnyder4. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get podcasts. Those Apple Podcast reviews, give us those 5-star ratings. Those really help us out. If you are watching on YouTube, hit that subscribe button down below. Hit that thumbs up button down below. It is very helpful, and we deeply appreciate it. We will be back at some point to discuss more of what's going on with Penn State football. Until next time, thank you for tuning in. Have a great day.